Hello and welcome along to the Property Academy podcast by Opus Partners. I'm your host, Steve McKnight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
And today on the show, we're talking about, we're going to have a flooded market with properties. Yes, the Housing Minister, Chris Bishop, has said he wants to free up land and flood the housing market with new supply. So what does it mean for property investors? Are house prices still going to go up? And when will it all kick into gear? That's what we're going to dig into today. Now, one question that I had for you, Andrew, is what is the Housing Minister, Chris Bishop, actually proposing?
So I actually got a lot of emails about this. There were quite a few headlines about this last week. The proposal is that there has to be more availability of land through the councils. So rather than have these strict rules around having these rural areas, you're actually able to build more intensively on land. So one of the big things is there's no minimum square metre rate for houses or apartments, and same with not even having to have a balcony on an apartment. So basically they're wanting to intensify the ability to build.
Now, when it comes to balconies and things like this in apartments, they've got a bit of heat in the media. I mean, realistically, how much can that actually save someone?
Like 50 to 70 grand, so it can be quite significant.
Is that the cost of a balcony?
Well,
50 to 60 grand.
That's the number that they had, but I don't know. I don't know if I'd believe it unless I saw the numbers myself. But
it's quite interesting because I've seen it in a couple of press releases, and in fact, the night that these new rules were announced, I was on Radio New Zealand talking about it, and we had a Wellington city councillor call up saying, 50 to 70 grand would save you. I was like, putting a balcony for 50 to 70 grand.
You think, though, if it were me designing it and building it, you'd surely just have the bottom of the apartment below, and then you just cut into that, right? But who knows? 50 to 70 is what I've seen.
Now, one of the big changes, and I don't think this has been given enough attention, is that councils are going to have to rezone enough land to account for up to 30 years of population growth, as opposed to just 3 years, which they have to do now. So they're going to have to free up a lot more land and zone it straight away. Now, this happened in Christchurch before, which we'll come back to in a second. But one thing that hasn't got picked up is that the government are going to say to the councils, well, when it comes to those population projections, you've got to use the high estimate from Stats NZ, not the medium estimate. And you think, oh, well, what sort of difference does that make? Actually, it's bloody huge. So if we look at the numbers in Auckland, the median estimate or medium estimate is that there's going to be, over the next 25, 30 years, an extra 460,000 people in Auckland, right? So we're going to crack over the 2 million mark. But if the government uses the high estimate, or the council uses the high estimate, rather than 460,000 extra people they've got to find land for, it's now 775,000 people. So an extra almost 300.
That's a big increase.
Yeah. So
that's, 80%?
So they've got to overshoot by quite a large amount. And it means that they're going to have enough land for an extra 117,000 houses, not just from what is today, but from what they would have to do if they were just using the medium estimate.
Okay, so then that's the ability for that land to be developed. Does that mean they have to have the infrastructure as well?
Well, of course you've got to have the infrastructure.
But okay, so then are you going to spend that money unnecessarily, would be my question.
Well, what the government's saying is that when it comes to greenfields development, because there's two types of development, right? We've got we typically call it up. It's not always up, but we're intensifying land. So you've got a house, you knock it down, you build a townhouse or several townhouses, or you build an apartment block. So that's kind of intensification, which we've already got infrastructure for, or you might need to upgrade a little bit. And then you've got greenfields, which is basically building on old farmland. And what they're saying is that they are going to come up with new ways to charge the developers so that they pay for that infrastructure. That's kind of what's in the policy. But I'm glad you actually brought this up because,
then why did you say? Of course they do.
Oh, come on, Andrew. Be nice to me. Now, one thing that is really important to realise is this is just step one of the government's three-step process. So what they're saying today is that this is all about freeing up land for development. They're going to come out with classic government. They're going to come out with another plan soon to improve infrastructure, and then they're going to come out with another plan later to provide some incentives to councils to actually support this growth. Now, take a step back for a second, Andrew. Why is the housing minister doing this?
Because the government believes we've got a housing crisis, we've got a shortage of properties, and so okay, well, if we make more land available, then that gives them more ability for developers to enter in and develop more properties, and that solves the issue, right? Easy.
Well, that's the idea behind it. But let's come back to Christchurch because Christchurch is sometimes held up as the shining city on a hill where, after the earthquakes, the government came in, rezoned 30 years worth of land for housing growth. And over time, or for about 4 years, Christchurch house prices didn't really go up between about 2015, 2016 through to about 2020. And on top of that, Christchurch, of course, is cheaper than the likes, or houses in Christchurch are cheaper than the likes of Wellington and Auckland. And so it's often used as the example or the case study for why you'd want to rezone a lot of land. But you live in Christchurch, Andrew. What's your view on this?
Well, I think the Christchurch is such a distorted market, in my opinion, because of the earthquake. So because we had all this land free up that wasn't land that would have been freed up, like all around CBD, there were damaged houses. There was lots of intensification of that land, lots more townhouses appearing in those areas where there might have been houses before. I just don't think it's a good example of the norm.
Yeah, I'd probably have a slightly different view to you there. I think that they got lucky, the government, in terms of housing cycles. If we look at Christchurch house prices, so the earthquakes happened in 2011, the big ones, and housing and land started getting freed up. But we actually saw house prices skyrocket directly after the earthquake. And one of the reasons is we had constrained supply because so many houses were actually damaged. House prices kept going up through to 2016 and then were pretty flat for a period. And it's that period that's kind of held up as the example of, oh, well, Christchurch house prices, freeing up so much land meant that house prices didn't go up. But actually, in the COVID boom, when all of that land was freed up, Christchurch house prices went up faster than in Wellington, Dunedin, and Auckland. And if you look at pre-COVID prices compared to post-COVID prices, Christchurch house prices have still gone up much, much faster than any of those cities. And so I don't really buy into this idea of if you free up lots of land, then there will be no house price growth. I think that flat market was more just where Christchurch and Canterbury happen to be in its property cycle. It's not necessarily that if you free up all of this land, you solve all of your problems. On top of that, the other thing you've got to think about when people say, oh, well, we freed up all of this land in Christchurch and Christchurch is cheaper, has cheaper property prices compared to Auckland and Wellington. Yes, but Christchurch has always been cheaper. It wasn't necessarily that you freed up lots of land. I'm not saying that if you free up lots of land for development, it has no impact on house prices, but the evidence doesn't say that freeing up all of this land solves all of your problems and you get no house price growth into the future. So I don't think Christchurch is necessarily the poster child, or should be the poster child of this necessarily working, because house prices went up in some cases almost 50% over the 3-ish years during the COVID boom. Anyway, I've gone on for a bit. Now, one question that I've got for you, Andrew, is when is this actually going to have an impact? So the government's come out, they've made this big announcement.
Problem solved. We've all got land now, right?
Is it?
Wrong. So it's going to take quite a long time. So the formal consultation doesn't actually begin until next year. And that's going to take probably about another year for that to actually work its way through the government. So it could be late 2025 before we've actually kind of got something of substance in place. And if you look at the Auckland Unitary Plan, that was first publicly notified in September 2013. Now, it wasn't in place until 2016, so 3 years later. So if you think about the fact that, okay, this is going to take some time, there is going to be some back and forward, and then we might have some sort of plan in place, then it could take another couple of years for a developer to actually buy some land and formally develop it. It might not be 5 years before we actually see any impact from the decision to make, the decision that they're making today.
Yeah, because they've announced that they're going to bring in this law. They're not even going to get it through the House for another, they're not even going to start work on the consultation for another year. Then on top of that, they've got to get it through government. That's going to take another year. And that is just to force the councils to take action because then the councils have to update their plans. That's going to take another couple of years. And then even if they abolish the urban-rural boundary in Auckland, that doesn't change that land that is currently zoned for rural That's still rural, right?
Mm.
Then a developer's got to go and buy the land and then apply for a change of use so that they can then develop on it. And then they've got to take another couple of years to build the houses. We're talking about 5 to 8 years before this legitimately creates a substantial amount of additional housing supply.
Yeah, and it kind of makes me think, and I'm a grumpy old cynic now. Is this just something that the government's putting out there? So it looks like they're doing something to fix the housing problem.
No, you're off your head. They're not just doing it for looks. Like these
Well,
people, like as much, whatever you say about politicians, like they genuinely think they're doing the right thing, and probably over time, it probably is the right thing to help add some supply to the market. But the wheels of government and the wheels of councils turn slowly.
Yes.
So it's going to be a 5 to 8 year process before we get an additional house.
Well, the
built.
other part to that, though, I think, it's all well and good to make land more affordable for developers. But, right, you're going to charge developers more for the infrastructure spend. That's obvious because you're going to have to recoup some of that cost. Then, of course, the developers might just have higher margins. If they can sell something at a higher price, they absolutely will. The extra profits are going to go to the developers, not to us as the consumer.
No, you're not entirely correct because what we're going to see is if you make it easier to build something, then you'll get more people, more competition. Some of that will reduce house prices. Now, if you decrease the costs for developers to build, yes, they will extract some higher margin, but there will be a balance between a higher margin for the developer and a lower price for the consumer. The issue in this case is that because the houses or additional houses won't come for another, and we're kind of ballparking this 5 to 8 years. By the time you get there, house prices will have already gone up. So I don't think this is going to cause a fresh wave of house price declines. Not because it's not a good policy, not because it won't necessarily have an impact over time, but for the fact that it's not actually going to be in place for another 5 years.
Well, the good thing I can say what I want because it's going to be 5 to 8 years before you can say I told you so.
You're going to be dead by then anyway. Either that or you won't remember what you said. Now, Andrew, one of the things I want to know is how does this impact kind of build and hold investors?
I think there's the possibility that it is going to bring in more competition in 5 to 8 years' time. I don't think it's going to have any impact whatsoever in the short term. Long term, yeah, sure, I can see your point about maybe more competition at that stage. I think there'll be a real concern from some investors around, okay, is this going to create an absolute ghetto where you've got these developers that go in and build these massive apartment complexes and they're just trying to maximize their profits at that stage? I think there is a risk of that kind of thing happening, but overall, I don't think it's going to have any meaningful impact in the next 7 years.
One of the other interesting things that I looked at was in Auckland, because the Auckland Unitary Plan came in 2016. Now, that was one of the things that was going to majorly solve the Auckland housing crisis. And what we saw was that house prices in Auckland, from when those rules were brought in, they increased at the top of the market at COVID. In fact, they increased a massive 48%. Now, since then, of course, house prices have gone down. House prices in Auckland are currently 16% above the level they were at when that Auckland Unitary Plan was in. So house prices have certainly gone up, come down a bit. But if you think about the potential for house price increases, if you think at the boom, almost 50% up the level they were at when that Auckland Unitary Plan came in. Look, housing supply is important, but I also don't think it's some sort of silver bullet where all of a sudden house prices are going to stay the same for the next 50 to 100 years. Over time, incomes go up. People desire nicer houses and are willing to pay for it, and that's one of the main reasons we see house prices going up. It's not just a lack of supply, it's that our country gets richer over time and people spend a larger proportion of their incomes on housing because housing is an aspirational asset. So that's kind of where I see it. So I think we'll probably see some impact. I think the impact will probably be quite delayed. I think it'll be far more delayed than many people actually think because, again, the wheels of government turn extraordinarily slowly. But I think there are some things to look at in terms of like the downside risks, in terms of people building literal shoeboxes that end up just not being very nice places and end up attracting unsociable people, if I can put it that way. Right, let's wrap it up there, but please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. It really does help us get the message out to more people. And if you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you want to see some of the graphs we're sharing, just type in Opus Partners YouTube. It'll be the first thing that comes up. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We release new videos on here every Monday and Wednesday. Thanks for listening to the Property Academy podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Knight.
And I'm Andrew Nicol.
We're going to be back here tomorrow with even more daily strategies, tactics, and insights to help you get the most out of the New Zealand property market. Until next time.